Good morning, everybody. It is the Awesemo MLB Strategy Show. We are sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm here joined by Eric, fresh off a return from the Masters. If you guys are tuning in right now, watch the video. Watch the video also, but also like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. A little bit of a rundown on what we're going to be doing. If you guys are looking for timestamps on this show, we're going to be talking about the main slate first and then the early slate after, kind of hoping they'll get some of the lineups trickling in. That'll give us a better idea of who will actually want to target on the early slate. Other than that, Eric, tell the people about your weekend.
Normal. I just casually went to Augusta, Georgia. Got to hang out with my dad, some of my best friends down there, and we had once in a lifetime kind of weekend. I mean, it's incredible to be out there. I was talking about how you feel a little bit strange at first because you can't bring your phones on the ground, and it's 2022 where how many times do you ever not have your cell phone on you? And so you're trying to meet up with them. You specifically pick times. It's like, just give me a sundial already or something. You have to schedule times to meet up with people certain places. You end up getting lost in the shuffle. There's 40,000 people out there with the same problem as you. But guess what? It was the best time you could possibly imagine. Tiger Woods live, feeling great. Scotty Scheffler is a god, and it makes no sense how good he is. And getting to see some shots up close was just the experience of a lifetime out there.
What's the longest you've gone without your cell phone before this?
Oh, this is the longest since I got a cell phone. I didn't get one till I was 17 or 18. It was like right before I turned 18, I got a cell phone for the first time. So that's probably the right answer.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a time where I broke my phone or lost or whatever, but not having a phone for a full day, it's definitely, it's almost like I could imagine it's almost like a naked feeling, not something we're accustomed to.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I could do it again from a DFS angle, I would have just built one lineup, known who those 6 dudes were, and just sweated that out entirely. Because I'm like, I hope I have a lineup breakthrough with Scotty Scheffler. I know I have a little bit, but when you're not live tracking on your phone, your iPad, the Masters app, which is just goaty, one of the best apps there are, it was one of those things where I'm like, I think I have enough Cam Smith, maybe not, but ended up being a really fun sweat, regardless, just in terms of just for a sports betting aspect. I had a little bit of Rory McIlroy that I ended up getting on over the weekend, and then almost caught him out of the middle of nowhere. What a fun final round.
So you wouldn't be aware of this, and we'll talk about baseball in a second. But I love my friend Eric. He had a fun weekend. I wanted to hear about it. I haven't talked to him at all in the last week or so. So the broadcast was really trying to push that Rory was live when he kind of wasn't. And they were interviewing him after his round, and he was conceding the round. He was like, "Hey, Scotty won the tournament. I gave my best effort." And they're like, "Well, you never know. You could still be live." He's like, "Nah, he won. It's just he's up like 5 strokes on me. He's got 4 holes left." And they kept trying to push like, "You're still alive." He's like, "No, I'm gonna go home." And they're like, "No." So that was kind of a funny dynamic, at least at the end. But
we've seen worse breakdowns before, though, at Augusta. I mean, once you get by 15 though, because 15 you can make 3, you can make 7. Like there's a wide range of outcomes on that par 5. Super thin on the left side of that green in person, and where they put that pin Sunday right on the crest in the back, I think is actually one of the easier pins. So it was set up a little bit more for scoring on Sunday, less wind. It looked like. I wasn't there on Sunday, but it ended up being a really fun sweat. Just in terms of him playing well enough, I thought, where if Scotty Scheffler had an apocalypse, which, I mean, golf does weird things, and we saw what happened even on 18. The guy couldn't hit the hole after being dominant for 71 holes with a short 3-footer. So 4 putting 18 to win by 3. What a dream.
Yeah. And just one more thing. I'm trying to also get some of the data updated on the site, which is one of the reasons I'm also stalling for time. What was the highlight? What was the highlight of the weekend? Like, what's one thing you took away? It was like, this is the coolest thing I saw.
Well, I mean, not to be sentimental and whatever else, but just having my dad there. Like, I live in Los Angeles. He lives in South Dakota. I don't get to see him as much as I used to. And it was just really pretty incredible to just be on the ground, sitting there with my dad, thinking about how many years and years and years I was grinding golf, and thinking about when you get older, you realize how much your parents actually do for you in terms of support, where it feels like sometimes when you're younger, they're forcing me to go out and play golf and basketball and all these things. But it was just so special to be able to like truly sit there with him, to be able to watch on 18 as every golfer was coming up, and just being like, we're both in fantastic places in our lives. And it's just nice, especially because my buddy who met up with us from Georgia, his dad had passed away in the last 3 years and was really close with us and our family. And so just being able to share it, the 3 of us, especially on that Friday, didn't get a lot better than that.
All right, now let's talk about some baseball stuff that people are here for. Also, shout out to Prize Picks, who is sponsoring the show. If you guys are signing up for Prize Picks for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo, get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit, and get yourself 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Now, Eric, let's chop up some baseball for the first time this year.
Great.
Starting with the Oakland A's, not the best of lineups this year. On the road against the Tampa Bay Rays, Luis Patino on the mound for Tampa Bay. And I want to start by asking about Patino, because he's actually one of the pitching prospects that I'm the highest on in baseball, just in terms of the arm talent, really good stuff. But one thing we have seen this year is that there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to pitch counts for some pitchers, particularly young guys. We've seen some pitchers who've been allowed to go out and throw 90 plus pitches. Some guys have been on 50 to 60 pitch limits. What are you expecting from Patino in what should be a really positive matchup?
I mean, I feel okay about it. I mean, the nice thing, and I think this doesn't get talked about enough with this, there's so few pitchers that can actually pitch above 85 pitches right now, that why are we worrying about it so much? I mean, there's a wide range of outcomes for a lot of these guys. I get your concern. I get the head nod for it, because if you can find the difference between 50 and 70, that's a drastic kind of difference in terms of some of these pitch count numbers. But I mean, other than just being on Twitter constantly and going through some of these numbers, I look at Luis Patino as a guy that as well, I'm very high on. He was kind of the key piece for Tampa Bay to pull the trigger on the Blake Snell trade. We saw some glimpses last year where he had really, really good stuff. The K rate was better in 2020. That'll kind of happen at times, but the walk rate came down drastically. 16.5% walk rate in 2020, 8.7% in a larger sample size, just over 1,000 pitches there. So I feel pretty confident in saying that this is going to be a pretty good pitcher long-term, and somebody that I'm just fine trying to roster and get ahead of the curve on.
Yeah. So here's where I'm going to push back a little bit about what you said. Is we've seen slates where there's pitchers that don't have any restriction at all. And then they're going to be compared to some pitchers that have fairly restrictive limits, like Garrett Cole. The Yankees count, they said he's going to be capped around 60 to 65 pitches. And then the slate comes out, it's like, well, he's 40% owned. Yeah. Some of the ownership seems egregious to me relative to the pitch counts. And then on that same, it actually might have been a different slate, but we'll see guys like Yu Darvish, no restriction in his first start. Sean Manaea, no restriction in his first start. So to me, when we're getting guys who are like 10 to 15% on with no restrictions, and then it's just the guy who's like the chalk of the slate, has like a 60 pitch count limit, that's the situations I don't really understand.
Agree. So I guess taking it with a grain of salt, I'm talking about when there's an expressed number that we kind of know what it's going to be. But if we're taking inferences based on spring training and saying, oh, and he only pitched up to 3 innings, who cares? It's spring training. He could be stretched out in a way where he's, throwing bullpen sessions, and they don't want to, if he's working on something mechanically in spring training, of course he's only going to go 3 innings because they're going to want to pitch him in 2 days or 3 days to work on something. There's a lot of different ways. And I'm lucky that I kind of have an in to know some Major League Baseball players through a friend of mine. And that's just the way that spring training works, is you have pitchers that will do their scheduled lead up to first day of baseball. But that's really only your elite starters that they're going to get to like 4, 5, 6 innings in spring training. You saw Max Scherzer pitch 6 innings on the tail end of a 3. Oh, that was sad. Jacob deGrom, a 3-inning outing for Jacob deGrom, rip. But that's kind of the piggybacking that gets done in spring training. So I try not to go completely crazy. I have to kind of use common sense, see what they've done in previous years. And obviously with Luis Patino, we don't have a ton of previous years to say this is going to be what it looks like for him in terms of a pitch count. So again, you're embracing some variance there, but he's a phenomenal young pitcher. I think he's sub 8K over on DK. That puts him squarely in play for me. Probably my favorite sub 8K pitcher on the board other than Dylan Bundy.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Luis Patino, like I said, I love him as a young prospect. Really good stuff. He's at home. And Nay's offense this year is just going to be terrible. One of the worst in baseball. In all likelihood, a team that actually their opening win total was 78.5, and it closed at, I believe, 70 or 71.5.
70.
Yeah, something along those lines after they made some trades. So a team that is kind of in a rebuild phase, not looking to compete now. With that in mind, not a team I'm really looking to stack. I know it's a smaller slate with 7 games, but this Oakland team, I do not envision it being a team that I target very often, unless it's one that's just going up against, I don't know, Matt Harvey in Baltimore or something like that. Other than that, it's hard to think there's too much upside in many games where we're looking at Oakland. Do you have any interest in this offense or any of their individual hitters?
I mean, Ramon Laureano is a guy that once upon a time we could see hit for some power and such, but God, I mean, it's just not a great spot. The problem too with the A's lineup is there's just no power absent Matt Olson, absent Matt Chapman. There's just no real guy that I'm really like, oh, I need to be over invested in this spot. And Laureano isn't even in the projected lineup that we have here on Awesemo. So, I mean, Sean Murphy, 3,500. He's got some power, at least from previous seasons. I think it's all right if you want to land on some of him, but literally he's going to be the highest owned bat from this offense, and with good reason, because nobody else has a whole lot of power. Tony Kemp going back to Houston, just these are not guys that are going to be long-term profitable to invest in. Maybe if it were 2019, I'd have some Elvis Andrus, but there's just no way that I'm going to get here. Just not.
All right. So let's talk about the starting pitcher on the mound for Oakland, Paul Blackburn, who sucked last year. He only pitched 38 innings, but those 38 innings didn't really go well. 5.87 ERA, 5.47 expected ERA, which isn't that much different for his career. I know we're only looking at a small sample size. He's thrown 138 big league innings, but in those 138 innings, 5.74 ERA, 4.7 FIP, 4.67 xFIP. I do not think this is a quality pitcher. Also, if you're trying to say like, well, maybe he's a high variance pitcher that strikes guys out. No, he doesn't do that either. He has a, let's see, 12.8% K rate over the course of his entire career. It was 14.9% last year. Mm-hmm. This is the worst possible pitcher to look at from a DFS perspective. Not good. Lets guys get on base. Doesn't generate strikeouts. Is this an appealing spot to be stacking the Rays?
Yeah, it is. I mean, this guy doesn't really throw it by anybody. The expected velocity right around 90.5. No fastball, primarily a sinker ball pitcher. That's problematic going up against the likes of Brandon Lau, looking at G-Man Choi, who will probably be in the lineup here today, looking at a number of these other guys. Wander Franco is going to just be incredible for years and years to come. This is a fantastic spot to be targeting Tampa Bay. We'll kind of see where they end up landing throughout the day. It always feels weird talking about top stack potential because there's so much variance that can happen as the day goes on. We still have, 7 hours basically until lock, just short of 7 hours. So Tampa Bay, 7.8% top stack potential, ownership share of 7.4%. If the slate started now, I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't be one of my highest, if not my highest owned stack on the board.
And then which players individually do you believe you're going to be looking at the most for the Tampa Bay Rays? If somebody's making a Tampa Bay stack, who should they be prioritizing to get into that?
Brandon Lau automatically, pretty much every single time. He was my call yesterday where I just didn't find second base all that appealing and you just needed to play a ton of him. He was sub 10% on a 10-game slate against a righty, and that should never happen. He'll be leading off here 5,400. Him and Wander Franco are going to be a two-man stack I go to a lot. It was a lot of fun when they had Nelson Cruz behind them for protection. That is no longer as he's in Washington. So Brandon Lau, Wander Franco, I find it hard to believe that they're not going to be a two-man and 5-2-1 type stacks on DraftKings that I get to a lot over the course of this entire season.
Yep, for sure. He's been one of the more popular plays on a lot of slates. And if you're making Rays stacks, generally makes sense to have him in. He was actually one of the leaders in all of the American League in wins above replacement last year. He's projected to have a really good season again this year, as well as Wander Franco, probably the two most valuable players on that team. Let's move on to the next game now, where we have the New York Mets. A little bit of a rivalry game here against the Philadelphia Phillies. And I want to start by talking about Ranger Suarez, who was under the radar, one of the better pitchers in baseball last year. It was just kind of a small sample size to where he wasn't really recognized as one of the best pitchers in baseball, but 39 outings, only 12 of them starts, so a little over 100 innings pitched. He had a 1.36 ERA, a 2.6 expected ERA, a 2.72 FIP. These numbers are all terrific across the board. How much of this do you think is replicable, or how close could he get to it this season?
I mean, it's got to be pretty. I mean, we're just learning about him now. And over the course of the last 3 years, it's looked really, really good in terms of what the stuff can do in terms of, 2020 he had 94 pitches in the big leagues, didn't strike anybody out there, but that K rate has continued to climb here. Got a really good sinker ball, another sinker ball pitcher here on this slate. What I really love about him is when you get a K rate and you limit hard contact, 31.1% hard hit percentage on the season. That resulted in an xERA of 2.62. I mean, he checks every single box now, over 1,500 pitches in the big leagues last year. So really looking at a guy that again, if you look at the previous 3 years before that, definitely a different pitcher, but there's been some improvements. You can get better as your big league career goes on. And obviously that sinker ball pitch is a huge part of his arsenal, mixes in a changeup and a fastball for the other two that really kind of stand out as above average pitches. So I'm happy to get to some Ranger Suarez for sure. 8,900, you're talking about some opportunity cost of getting to Manoah in a tough spot against the Yankees, or Alex Wood against the Padres, which just isn't the same kind of lineup without Tatis there. But at 8,900, Ranger Suarez is another guy that we've kind of talked about, two of my favorite pitchers on the board right out of the gate.
Yeah, I'm trying to find some information on any kind of pitch count that he's going to have, just because the 8,900 is pretty steep. And as good as he was last year, I'm not sure I totally buy into it repeating. Obviously the exact number is not necessarily being replicable. This is a tough matchup against the Mets, who, as much as I think their pitching could be diced this year because of the injuries we've seen right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it, Jacob deGrom. He's a fractured shoulder. He's going to be out for an extended period of time. Max Scherzer's first start of the season was already pushed back from the first game to the second game. While he looked okay in that start, the reason he got pushed back was because of hamstring tightness. So there's a lot of concerns about the Mets pitching staff. The offense, not as much of a concern. So if Ranger Suarez's numbers from last year are at all a fluke, I kind of think this is a decent spot to look at the Mets as a contrarian stack, because they're only projected to have 4% ownership tonight as a team. There's a lot of firepower in this offense. Francisco Lindor, we've got Pete Alonso, who's one of the better hitters against left-handed pitching in baseball. So I think this is a good team to get to for contrarian purposes, particularly in a hitter-friendly ballpark in Philadelphia. Do you see that at all as an angle tonight?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this Mets lineup, this Mets team is a team that I think everybody's kind of been bullish coming into it. Yesterday was kind of an outlier because we had one game where the conditions were about perfect. It was 73 degrees in Kansas City. Everything looked really, really solid. Every single game outside of the Angels, which in Anaheim, you get the marine layer that comes in at 66 degrees. I mean, 59 degrees. There's really no phenomenal game environment outside of, I believe, Atlanta, Washington, where it could be getting closer to 70 degrees. So in terms of relative to the rest of the slate, I think the Mets do stick out as a spot with Lindor. We always knew that he was going to get back to being Francisco Lindor, as long as he doesn't get balls thrown at his head. That seems like something that will be a plus. Eduardo Escobar is a really nice bat to get thrown into it. I won't be writing him off at the back of this lineup. Going back to his Twins and Diamondbacks days, has definitely had utility in DFS. So I'm looking at a lot of guys. And of course, Peter Alonso, you put him in the 3-hole and he's just got massive power. I expect him to be one of the guys that could lead the NL in home runs this season. So no doubt about it. Starling Marte leading off. There's just power, there's speed, there's a number of ways to stack them up.
Yeah, that's how I see this also. Mets team not picking up much ownership. And the other thing also, Ranger Suarez is currently expected to be really popular. So I think that could be a good spot to get leverage on. We have a super chat here from Abel Ramos. He's saying, hey fellas, any early slate coverage today? Yes. So we're going to talk about the main slate first and then the early slate after. I figure that the early slate, the reason to do it afterwards is just because there's some gap between when we started the show and when that slate starts. So if I'm hoping that by the time we end up getting to there, we'll have some lineups out we could talk about. And then also if anybody has questions while they're building lineups, we can hit on that as well. So that's kind of the way I structured the show, but we'll see going forward. We could always change the order. I thought this is what made the most sense for today. The other side of the game, pitching for the New York Mets, Taijuan Walker's on the mound. So Walker had an interesting season last year. He was really good for the first couple of months. Not as much in the second half of the season to an extreme rate. But here's also what happened. He had a back injury early in the season. And for whatever reason, here's the way the Mets have handled injuries in recent years. You're hurt. You know what you're doing? You're playing through it. And it's like the Mets don't know it's a 162 game season where they're willing to be like, hey, you know what? Let's make you play through an injury now. And then you just suck for the rest of the year, as opposed to take a week or two off and be good for the rest of the year. Because last year, Taijuan Walker, and of course, last year, pitchers batted in the National League. The Mets had a thing where it was for maybe like a month. Walker was so injured, he was not allowed to swing. So he would just stand up there and take 3 pitches in a row, head back to the dugout, then go out and struggle pitching. They never thought to actually shut him down. The reason being is I think if you look overall at his numbers last year, it's a little bit misleading. I think he has potentially better this year than he was. Now, with that said, I don't necessarily think the spot against the Phillies is where we want to chase that kind of upside. So what do you make of this matchup, Taijuan Walker and the Phillies offense?
I mean, if you're going to make me pick one, I'm definitely going to pick the Phillies offense. It's just a question of how popular they're going to be relative to the other teams on this slate. And they're going to be very popular. 9.9% top stack percentage, ownership share a little bit higher. Now, amongst the 3 teams that have the best chances of being the top stack, that being Atlanta, Philadelphia, and LA, they're the ones with the least amount of negative leverage. We kind of know with Schwarber in this lineup as well, that's just more ridiculous power at the top of it. JT Realmuto, one of the best hitting pitchers over the years, 4,600. You're definitely paying the freight for him. But it feels like a lot of the guys that you want to be playing from this lineup, all at the top, Castellanos as well, added to this team. You have all these guys that it's hard for me to go outside of 1 through 5. Bryson Stott is a guy that, there's expectations for going forward. We've been pretty bullish in our projections for him through the first couple slates, but I don't really know. 2,100, maybe he's going to be a popular piece to kind of give you some salary relief, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 or something to that nature. I just feel like it's going to be a very difficult stack for me to land on Gregorius, Vierling, Segura, a number of these guys that I just don't want to be rostering. So if it ends up being something where I'm rostering all the chalky guys from Philadelphia when I put my lineups in the wash, I probably will end up lower on them just as a result of Toronto is getting a little bit overlooked. Some of these other teams that I just have a lot more interest, there's positive leverage to be had for them. So if the slate started right now, I probably wouldn't get to them as much just because I feel like my lineups would look pretty similar to other Phillies builds.
Yeah, and just for reference, as of right now, we've got Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber. These are all guys projected for around 20% ownership on DK. They should be 3 of the more popular bats on this slate, as we've seen for a lot of games so far this year. The Phillies have had some popular offense. Let's talk about some pitching now. And I think a pitch we're potentially going to want to target, although the matchup isn't ideal, the Toronto Blue Jays against the New York Yankees. You had brought up Alek Manoah's name earlier. Now, this Yankees lineup, it's going to be tricky for this reason. There is a lot of firepower in the offense, a lot of upside. There are a lot of strikeouts to be had too. When you're talking about guys like Joey Gallo, Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, all guys that could homer at any given time, but more often than not, they're going to make outs and they're going to be making strikeouts. So with that in mind, Alek Manoah is one of the highest one of the higher strikeout young pitchers in baseball. There's clear upside. There's obvious downside to pitching in New York. How are you going to handle this situation?
I'm going to roster a ton of Alek Manoah if he's going to be 25%. This is kind of the way that I play a lot of MLB DFS. I'm willing to embrace a ton of variance because if you don't win, you don't win. But the amount of upside you get from a guy like Alek Manoah, 10.24 K per nine last season. That's tops on this entire slate, best K rate period. Plus you get this Yankees matchup where there are a lot of strikeouts to be had. I find it difficult not to want to get to him tons between Stanton, Gallo. Judge is, one of the better guys. Josh Donaldson is just watching things go across the play without even swinging here in the first couple of games. Yeah, he's got some pop, but I just see a ton of strikeouts to be had here. Aaron Hicks, a pretty high K rate. I'm happy to get to as much Manoah as you possibly could give me if he's just going to be 25%. Our top pitchers tool, one of the things I lean on the absolute most of any of our tools here at Awesemo. Right now, he is the top projected pitcher, top two pitcher percentage, 25.8, which again isn't drastic. I mean, it's just a fourth of the time, but because of that K rate, because of his ability to generate swings and misses and this Yankees lineup, it's got some pop, but if you give me 2 or 3 solo shots, I'm all right with it. Like, this is still a guy that I think at 10-2, based on a lot of the stacks that I have the most interest in today, I shouldn't have any problem getting to tons of him.
Yeah, and here's some good news too. His last start of spring training, he threw 4 innings. So I think we're probably looking at 5 to 6 innings today from Manoah, assuming it goes well against the Yankees. If he gets bombed by them, which is always a possibility going up against this offense, then he probably doesn't pitch 5 or 6 innings. But the idea that he pitched 4 scoreless innings in his final spring training start, I think that is good reason to at least feel pretty good about his pitch count relative to some other pitchers. Also, if you look at how he finished last year, last 4 starts of the season, 10 strikeouts, 7 strikeouts, 8 strikeouts, 10 strikeouts. He closed the year really well. It seemed like he was coming into his own. So there's a lot of potential upside there. But I also want to shout out this on the other side of this game with the New York Yankees offense. They are projected for almost no ownership. The Yankees are projected for 1% ownership as a stack. I want to be over that 1% number because it's the New York Yankees offense. Whenever you have a chance to roster New York, even against a good pitcher like Manoah, I think it makes sense if you're playing multiple lineups to play both sides here. There's clear upside in Manoah, but if it goes south for him, it's probably going to be because the Yankees are able to hit a couple of homers off him. So I think there's a lot of good one-off plays from the Yankees. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing this the same lineup with Manoah, but when you look at this offense and you consider the firepower in it, when you could get Judge's 1% on, Stanton 1%, LeMahieu 1%, the most popular hitter in this entire lineup is Josh Donaldson at 2% ownership. I understand they're expensive, but the only expensive pitcher on the slate is Alek Manoah. So if you're playing a Yankees stack, you don't even care about the pricing all that much because you're rostering cheap pitchers in that point. Would you agree that 1% Yankees is a good contrarian team to get to?
If I didn't, I'd be pretty bad at MLB DFS. Like, this is an obvious spot where you should stack it up. And if you're newer to MLB DFS, it might sound redundant that we're saying, oh, I love Manoah. He's my favorite tournament pitcher on the slate. But then I also love stacking up the Yankees. But it's one of those things where if something goes wrong with Manoah, if he gets out of the game early for whatever reason, maybe he's walking guys, which I don't find to be very likely. It's a ballpark that's just a bandbox. It's a lineup with tons of power. There's a lot of ways where fluky things can happen, and it just turns south on Manoah very quickly because of how potent 1 through 9, basically, this entire Yankees lineup can be. And the only reason Josh Donaldson's garnering more attention than anybody else here is because third base throughout baseball, if you did any year-long drafts, you know how bad third base is. It is a very top-heavy position, and he ended up being a guy you kind of had to reach for in those regards. He's kind of somebody, if you're looking for a one-off, he makes some sense just because you're looking at Austin Riley, Anthony Rendon being the only 2 guys, Wilmer Flores, so long as he's in that lineup, which I expect him to be against San Diego. We saw him against more righties last year. So I'm looking at third base. Yeah, Josh Donaldson makes a nice tournament piece, but this entire stack makes a lot of sense just going up and down. And I will say too, for anybody that likes the advanced metrics in terms of FIP, XFIP, Alek Manoah, 3.8 FIP, which is a decent mark, 4.17 expected FIP. So field independent, actually expected to garner a little bit more run production against him this season. So he's got great K stuff, but perhaps there's an opportunity for a little bit of regression, just slightly, but one of those things where I could definitely see a Yankee stack working out.
And let's talk about the other side, because obviously these Toronto Blue Jays games have been absurd to start the season. Like, you're seeing runs scored by touchdowns where you look at at Rays games like, oh, look, the Rays are down 7. The Blue Jays are down 7-0. Oh, look, now they're up 10-7. Yeah. And then on the other side, you look at the game where yesterday they're up 6-0. Then all of a sudden they're down 10-6.
12-6. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just ridiculous swings. The pitching's been bad from the offense has been ridiculously good. So what do you make of the offense against Jameson Taillon? And, Taillon last year, he was one of the key acquisitions for the Yankees in the offseason. He was solid, not spectacular, but solid for the New York Yankees. 4.3 ERA, 3.89 expected ERA. If you look at his strikeout numbers this year, even though he went into the AL East, he did have a career best 23.2% K rate. In terms of the velocity numbers, that was still solid last year. He's had some health issues in the past, but still maintained an average fastball velocity of 94.1 miles per hour. What do you make of Taillon in this matchup against the Blue Jays? Obviously, the Toronto offense is a pretty scary one.
Yeah, it's a pretty scary one. He's also giving up pretty high launch angles as well, 20.9 degrees last season. That can be a problem in Yankee Stadium against one of the best hitting, if not the best hitting team in baseball over the course of the last 2 years. Yeah, you lose Marcus Semien. I don't really care. 1 through 9, you've got problems if you're off. And Jameson Taillon, again, he's one of those guys that I could see. I'm not saying that I want to go crazy, but there's basically every pitcher outside of Paul Blackburn and Josh Rogers that's in play. And the difference between Taillon, who's the third lowest projected player in the top pitchers tool, and Michael Lorenzen from the Angels up there at 19.3% is basically 6% difference. So I could see myself being over the field on Taillon in the same way that I'm over the field on Toronto bats. So pretty similar to what we talked about with the Yankees side.
Yeah, and the difference, though, is I don't really have that much interest in Taillon, whereas I do in Manoah. The thing with Taillon is, number one, he's not as good as Manoah, but then also this Blue Jays offense is just so ridiculous, absurdly good. And Taillon also, there's an opportunity cost here. He's 8K on DK. That's probably more than I really want to pay for him in this spot. And then, I mean, just that Blue Jays lineup from top to bottom, they're going to crush some pitchers this year. So both sides of this game, like you said, I think these are offenses we want to stack. The Blue Jays are not quite as contrarian as the Yankees. They're still projected for, 9% ownership, 9% chance to be a top stack. But I think the offense, the firepower makes them a team to be, somewhere around even with the field on. Do you think you'll be overweight to them or closer to the field?
Kind of depends. I will, again, that's a terrible answer to some people, but it just depends. Right now, they're the most positive leverage out of the top 4 teams, just 0.3% leverage. But also, I will say, it is easier for me to take a team like this where there's basically 9 guys that I will roster here as opposed to the Phillies, where there's only like 6 guys that I really want to get to based on their metrics. As long as Raimel Tapia isn't in this lineup, the acquisition from Colorado, who I don't know why he keeps getting some plate appearances here. I'm just kind of worried that if he shows up in this lineup, I'll have to X him out. But everybody else, regardless of how it comes out, I mean, Alejandro Kirk getting in there at catcher, regardless of if it's him or Danny Jansen, I have tons of interest. I have tons of interest in every single player up and down this lineup. No real sacrifices need to be made in terms of positionality. Pretty easy to stack them up because there's no overlap. There's no like double catcher that you could be running into, anything like that. So you get a pretty clean opportunity to stack up a team in multitude of ways. I always really like that and consider that a little bit more than most people.
All right, so let's move on to the next game. It is the Atlanta Braves at home against the Washington Nationals. Now, starting for Washington, it looks like it's going to be Josh Rogers. When I was putting together the run sheet and gathering information for the show this morning, there was no starting pitcher listed. So kind of on the fly, I'm trying to look up Josh Rogers, somebody that I am personally not all that familiar with. But here's one thing that always stands out to me. If a pitcher is 27 years old and has spent the majority of their career at the minor league level, chances are there's a good reason they have not made it up to the big leagues very much. He's made 9 career starts, so he's had, a couple of times been up at the big leagues. The reason that he hasn't is now looking through his minor league numbers. Wasn't all that great in the minor leagues either. So last year in AAA with the Nationals, he had 3.7 ERA, 4.47 FIP. But with Baltimore in AAA, also limited sample size, he had a 7.79 ERA, 6.94 FIP. Overall, the numbers in the small sample size, he's been in the major leagues below replacement level, negative 0.4 wins above replacement, 5.55 ERA, 6.99 FIP, 6.67 xFIP. This does not appear to be a good pitcher and seems like someone we're going to want to be stacking against.
Yeah, we definitely are. Josh Rogers, anytime you click on DraftKings.com and see a Baltimore Orioles cap and then a different team attached to them, it's a problem. Like you're probably, unless it's Dylan Bundy, in which case I'm just never going to quit this guy. But Josh Rogers is just a problem. He's not very good. Plus, it's a lefty against, I will say that's maybe one of the perks is that it's a lefty going up against the likes of a Matt Olson, but you get Ozzie Albies. Austin Riley should be the highest owned third baseman here on this slate. You get Adam Duvall in there. You get Marcell Ozuna. I mean, it's just going to be problematic for a lefty going into Atlanta here. Best of luck to you, young guy, but the top pitchers tool hates him. Hard to say that I want to get to anything there. It's going to be systems go for Atlanta if you want to be going to the most popular offense on the slate.
Yeah, and very, very popular offense. So I think we should hit on that because they're projected for nearly 17% ownership on DraftKings as a team. Over on FanDuel right now, we have the Braves projected for 18% ownership. So it is a lot higher than the top stack odds. I also don't think all the betting information for this game is quite updated for Josh Rogers being the starter. Not to say that means that the Braves actually on a 7-game slate have around a 20% chance to be the top scoring team. So I do think the ownership is going to be a little bit inflated. Do you see yourself coming in underweight to this team as a stack, even though the matchup is so good?
Yeah, I probably do, because that's the way that I'm going to approach MLB DFS all the time. But I will say that the nice thing about Atlanta is that the back half of the lineup with Dansby Swanson, who isn't historically been as good of a hitter as he was projected to be coming out of Vanderbilt, but he's still 3,100 back of the lineup and has enough to possibly get there for you, even though 11.1% ownership on a site like FanDuel at 3,100 is pretty egregious. Travis d'Arnaud, you're probably going to be the catcher here in this spot. Adam Duvall, alluded to already. There's a way that you could get your four batters from the back half of this lineup really still work out for you. Yeah, most of your interest is going to be with the big boppers. Even Matt Olson going up against a lefty, I really don't care as much. Austin Riley, Marcell Ozuna, of course, are going to be popular, and they should be. If you're playing cash, this is a team that you're going to be pulling from quite a bit. But as it stands for tournaments, I probably am going to be looking more at the back half of the lineup than the front half, and just kind of hoping that I avoid some of these 25, 26% chalk bombs it looks like on FanDuel.
Yeah, and I think there's also a good way to mix in some of the end of the lineup guys and differentiate some of our Braves stack a little bit. Because, if you're just like, hey, I'm going Albies, Riley, Ozuna. I mean, these guys are all north of 20% owned. You're going to have a fairly chalky lineup. But if you mix in, say, Eddie Rosario into one of those stacks, who is projected to lead off and is also cheap, and also isn't projected for that much ownership, like that to me is an easy way to differentiate. Is you throw an Eddie Rosario into the lineup, maybe Travis d'Arnaud as a catching option because he's projected for somewhat modest ownership. So there are reasonable ways to differentiate the Braves stack and make it, a little bit less popular. That, or maybe, mixing in a less popular starting pitcher in with our Braves stacks. Let's hit on the other side of this game now. Next, we have Huascar Ynoa on the mound for Atlanta. He's somebody who also looked really good at times last year, his first full season in the big leagues. He showed some really good stuff, also some good strikeout upside. So last year, 96.6 average fastball velocity. The K rate was 26.9%. Matchup against the Nationals, you have to walk around the Juan Soto bat. But other than that, this is an offense that I think could be had. And I think is one of the higher upside pitchers that we have tonight.
Oh, totally. I mean, it's one of those classic situations, gives up some hard contact, but the other nice thing about Ynoa, 6.7% walk rate. You avoid some of these like smaller, like the Victor Robles and the Alcides Escobars, those kind of guys where, they can be slap happy. He's not going to be walking those guys and getting them on base and giving them opportunities to run or do anything against him. So I feel like Ynoa, that 26.9% K rate you alluded to, he's the second best K rate on the board today. So it's hard to say that you don't have interest there. Also, we're talking about FIP of 3.93, xFIP 3.40 from last season. That is looking pretty stellar. That's the third best on this slate behind Knapp, and that doesn't really count because he's a reliever. And Ranger Suarez, the actual starter there, slightly better, 0.02 xFIP better. So I'm looking at Ynoa as a guy that you definitely want to be rostering today too.
Yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on his any potential reported pitch counts here. Is there a number that would kind of scare you off him with Ynoa? Because on the surface, I think he does look pretty solid, but he did come into spring training with a little bit of shoulder soreness, 3 innings in his last start. Is any of that a concern for you? Because it's something I'm keeping my eye on.
So this is kind of what I was trying to explain, and I maybe did it a worse job than what I was trying to when we were talking about it at the beginning of the show. When you're talking about pitch counts, it has to be relative to every other pitcher on the slate. If there's one guy that's not going to be on a pitch count and he just stands out and he's going underlooked, yeah, you need to be overinvested. But for the most part, most of these guys are going to have the same tight range of outcomes unless you hear about a pitch count, unless you hear it explicitly that he's going to be limited, like Garrett Cole, to 60, 65 pitches, in which case you got to be hitting eject and you have to just kind of live with the result. And if he mows down 10 in 5 innings, you just have to live with the result of that. If he does that in a clean 60, 65 pitches. But this is a guy that has too good of a K rate, and the opportunity cost is not that high. There's no real stud pitchers. I mean, for God's sakes, I'm going to be playing a lot of Dylan Bundy. We've talked about Luis Patino. Ranger Suarez is expensive, 8,900, but I think will be somebody I mix in. And Alek Manoah stands out clearly for me as the guy I want to get overweight to. But I think you got to be kind of factoring in Noah. I mean, second best K rate, and it's pretty discernible that him and Manoah are your two best strikeout arms on this entire slate. So no way around it. I think you just have to kind of live with the result of it, especially if he's going to be underowned like the top pitcher stool is showing.
Yeah. And then as for Washington bats, it's, we've got Nelson Cruz. Obviously, there's power upside there. Juan Soto, maybe the best hitter, but probably the best hitter in all of baseball. I don't think there would be any real pushback against saying that. Overwhelming favorite to win the National League MVP this year. But I can't really look to stack this team because the lineup is so thin. Kelbert Ruiz, he's a good prospect. He's cheap at more of a DK play than FanDuel, because FanDuel, we just don't have to roster a catcher. So DraftKings, I think Kelbert Ruiz could be in the mix. Same with Nelson Cruz and Juan Soto as one-offs. I'm not really looking to aggressively stack this team, though. Do you feel any differently?
No, I feel like I did this a lot last year. Now we have Nelson Cruz at least behind him too. But Soto plus X batter. It used to be Josh Bell. You could go 5-3 and have some Cruz Bell mixed in as well. 4K, 3,800 for two pretty strong power bats. Pretty decent grades, pretty decent projections in our projections here at Awesemo. So I think Soto, Nelson Cruz, Josh Bell, I think that's a decent 3-man game to kind of intertwine into lineups. But Maikel Franco might be my deep flyer. If I'm going to play 4 over on FanDuel, might kind of throw him into the mix. But stacking them up feels a little bit, you kind of want to do it just because there's still, as much as we just made the case for Noah, the reason that he's not as popular is 43.6% hard hit percentage last year in 243 batted ball events. So I find it hard to believe that there aren't going to be games where Noah gets blown up with a lot of power, and there's power to be had at the top of this lineup.
All right. Speaking of getting blown up, I'm going to make you try to sell me here on Dylan Bundy, because Dylan Bundy, you mentioned his name a couple of times as somebody you're potentially going to be interested in. His numbers last year, 6.06 ERA, 4.79 expected ERA, 5.51 FIP. It was not good. He is now on your Minnesota Twins at home against the Seattle Mariners. Sell me on him. Why are you rostering Dylan Bundy tonight?
I just like pain. And I really like pain. And there's opportunities where Dylan Bundy, I mean, he's kind of got this assorted mix of pitches now, which is never great, because if you have 5 pitches, you generally don't even have 1 anymore. But this fastball used to be something, and it's really not there in a meaningful way anymore, but he is very cheap. This Seattle offense just, I'm not really sold on them here yet. I know that they've got some good young players. I mean, Kalenic really struggled at the big league level last year. They have one of the best young prospects in Julio Rodriguez at center field now. I think that they're just going to be a work in progress outside of Haniger and Winker, who are definitely established bats in this lineup. But I mean, Suarez really regressed last season. Adam Frazier, he's a contact guy that I just don't think deserved to be Pittsburgh and then San Diego in the All-Star game last year. Ty France really isn't somebody I'm worried about. Looking at the rest of this lineup, I think it's pretty gettable. And so for me, if I'm going to be looking at the cheap end, trying to make a case for somebody, I'm going to probably land on his name more than I'm comfortable saying. It's a 7-game slate, so you kind of want to be making some stands somewhere. And Dylan Bundy, 14.2% top pitcher percentage. He's up to 30% ownership here already this morning. That's not a great feeling whatsoever to have him still be as popular as what he is. But there are definitely some bats, whether it's the Angels we'll get to a little bit later, where you're going to have to be paying the freight to be able to get up there on DraftKings. And I just feel like Dylan Bundy, out of the far bottom tier guys, is the one I'm most confident with. There's no way I'm going to be playing Josh Rogers, Blackburn, Martinez, even Elise Hernandez is not somebody that I find myself wanting to roster a whole heck of a lot. So if I'm going cheap, I'm going to just kind of hold my nose and be rostering Dylan Bundy.
I'm more inclined to almost take Bundy out of my player pool because everybody's thinking the same way you are. Yeah. He is so overwhelmingly popular on this slate. He's 30% owned. That's just the number to me that's way, way too high. And I don't want to be playing a 30% owned Dylan Bundy. Do I think the Mariners offense is great? No, but at the same time, too, that ownership on Bundy is pretty absurd. Although, with that said, the Mariners are kind of popular, too. So, on one hand, it's like I want to get leverage with the Mariners, but they're projected for 8% ownership over on FanDuel as a team. On DraftKings, we have the Mariners projected for 7.5% ownership. So the field is there with them. It's not like we're getting some kind of massive ownership discount, but I don't really want to be on Bundy just because of the amount of ownership he's picking up. So maybe it's inevitable that once I'm building lineups, I have to get to some of him. But I kind of view him similarly to like Steven Matz yesterday. I do not like Steven Matz as a big league pitcher. So my most rostered offense yesterday was the Pittsburgh Pirates. I don't know that I could do it with the Mariners because the ownership's already there, but I'm looking to for me at least, to probably be underweight to the field on Dylan Bundy. But what do you make of the Mariners offense on the other side? Because they're also somewhat popular.
Yeah, I talked about them a little bit where Winker, Haniger, those are guys that I want to be rostering all the time. They're just established, phenomenal big league hitters. Haniger, one of the most underrated, better stories that we had in the season last year, had been fighting a ton of injury issues, came out of the gate just absolutely swinging last year and just performed at an elite level. So I'm thinking him and Winker, pretty easy to land on those two guys. Clinic, we're going to see have some massive power, but it's just not really translated here of late in his year basically in the big leagues now. I don't really find this entire stack to be that interesting, but if you want to pluck some one-offs or land on some of those guys, go ahead. Adam Frazier on FanDuel is 2,400. I suppose you could try to make that a thing, but I don't really think he has enough power to really be a day in, day out guy that I want to be relying on for lineups as a one-off. I think we can do a little bit better. So I'm probably going to find myself around the field on the likes of Winker and Haniger and pretty much be writing off the rest of the offense.
Yeah, I'm going to be, like I said, I would like to get leverage on Bundy, but the field is rostering Bundy and Seattle pretty heavily. So I'll probably be closer to the field on Seattle. They are my preferred side against Bundy, considering the ownership there, but it's not like I'm going to be playing 15% Mariner stacks to get overweight to the field on them. So unless that number changes, it's not a team I'm going to be taking some kind of massive stand on. And we do have on the other side of the game, Chris Flexen is going to be pitching against your Minnesota Twins. Now, Flexen is somebody who, I don't know if you remember this, but back in the day, he had really, really strong minor league numbers. And he was, I think his first big league start, he was like 40% owned when he was pitching for the Mets against the Padres, and the Padres sucked. I always kind of remember that in the back of my head when it comes to Chris Flexen. And then Flexen was just terrible the first few years in the big league after he had that one start where he was just really popular. His minor league numbers that year actually had a 1.66 ERA, 2.67 FIP in the minors when the Mets called him up. But he kind of finally started to get on track last year. 3.61 ERA, 4.27 expected ERA, 3.89 FIP. The strikeout numbers were not there at all, only a 17% K rate. But considering he did have a little bit of success, I kind of think that he's a preferred pitching option for me relative to his ownership and some of the other guys on the slate. It's not that he has that much upside, but he's only projected for 1% ownership. Does the ownership at all make him appealing? I know he's expensive. I know there theoretically isn't that much upside, but nobody's playing him.
Yeah, if you're going to have a 13% top two pitcher percentage and 1% ownership, yeah, you're going to want to get there. We'll see if that changes at all. I mean, the Twins lineup is far more potent than you would think it would be. Absent Nelson Cruz and absent, a number of other guys that we've lost over the years. It's just so sad to think about. But we've got Buxton back at the height of his powers. This is beautiful stuff. Max Kepler-Kirilloff has a massive bat in that lineup. That is going to be something to look for going forward. Miguel Sano, hopefully a better season for him on the onset. We've got Gary Sanchez. Jorge Polanco continues to be a stud. So I think there's no doubt about it. This Twins offense is going to be one that I want to get to here, but I get your case for Flexen. I find it so intriguing, though. I will say 2017 to 2019, he had north of a 15% walk rate every single season. Obviously very, very small limited sample sizes, 2018, 2019. What did he do last year to drop to a 5.4% walk rate? I find that to be very, very strange. Obviously, high walk rate leads to me wanting to just stack up teams a lot more. If we see regression back to his mean that he had shown the previous, 3 years outside of 2020, where he was walking dudes at a high clip, this could be a very, very interesting spot to be getting to a lot of these Twin stacks and being overweight. it's a team that I'm just going to be overweight to a lot, not just because they're my team and yay, we want to cheer for them, but they just have such powerful bats up and down the entire lineup right now. 6.7% top stack potential isn't that great. 8.2% ownership share, but the wind's blowing out 10 miles an hour. I think that there's just viability all around this entire lineup for power. So if that walk rate can go back to what it was before, we could be having a lot of fun with lower owned twin stacks than what I think they should be.
Yeah. And then in terms of what flexing changed, he pitched overseas in 2020. And I think that really paid him benefits because he pitched in my favorite baseball league, the KBO.
That was amazing. Those were great days.
He was really good in the KBO. He struck out 10.18 hitters per 9 innings. He had 3.01 ERA, 2.74 FIP there. And I know that obviously the level of competition is lower, but the fact that he went over there, pitched well for a year, then came back to the major leagues and had a relative amount of success last year, he was a 3-win pitcher. He produced 3 wins above replacement. Yeah, that's a solid middle of the rotation pitcher. I don't really think there's that much upside in him, but the pitching sucks today, and he's projected for 1% ownership. I don't think it's crazy to play, like 5 to 10% of flex and be well overweight to the field. So that's really my only stance here.
No pushback, none.
The next game on the slate, it is the Los Angeles Angels at home against the Miami Marlins. Now, this goes to show how bad the pitching options are today because Michael Lorenzen is projected for 36% ownership on DraftKings. He is far and away right now the most popular pitcher on the slate. I know the pitching options aren't bad, but should we really be playing Michael Lorenzen at 36%?
What are we thinking for a pitch count for him? I mean, the best hitting pitcher in baseball. Yeah. Congratulations. That does them no utility here.
That is so
no. So Shohei Ohtani. Sorry.
Yeah. Like, I'm just thinking. What are you doing?
I'm thinking over the last couple of years because I have a league where we allow for hitters and we have a league where hitting stats can count for a pitcher, and in terms of just like anything that they do positive can get thrown in. Michael Lorenzen was always a reliever that we would always roster. That's the only reason I knew who this guy was because he's one of the better hitting pitchers. He played outfield once upon a time there for Cincinnati in spots. So Michael Lorenzen, not Shohei Ohtani. I correct myself. He's the best hitting pitcher on his team. So that's for sure.
He's not even in discussion for the best hitting pitcher on your team. And you're boldly proclaiming Michael Lorenzen.
You know what I meant. I'm saying that.
Yeah, I know you meant. You think that Michael Lorenzen is better than Shohei Ohtani. It's up for debate, right? Maybe Jordan, throw up a poll.
Jordan Klein, don't do this to me.
Yeah, throw up a poll. Let's see what the people say. Eric has made his case. He thinks Michael Lorenzen is better than Shohei Ohtani. We could also check. I don't remember how many MVP votes Michael Lorenzen got last year. Maybe he came in second.
0.
It was really
he can throw 100 miles an hour. That's cool.
Yeah, he does. He's also very strong. He's big biceps. He's big arm.
Gigantic man. We might.
I don't want to play him at 30. I don't want to play 36% of him tonight against the Marlins, though.
I mean, he could legitimately, like, we've never seen him pitch any kind of extended innings. So I don't really know what to think about this. This feels like one of the bigger blind spots here on this slate to me. I don't really even know what to say. Michael Lorenzen, that's ridiculous rostership.
Yeah, I'm going to play a lot of the Marlins as a stack. They're projected for 2% ownership, 7% chance to be a top stack. Lorenzen is currently the most popular projected pitcher on the slate. That could change later on in the day. And like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, guys, and check out live before lock and stuff later, because maybe these numbers will change. If they hold, I just don't know how I don't just go really heavy on the Marlins in a similar way to what I did with the Pirates yesterday and just say, like, I hope Michael Lorenzen shows up as not the best pitcher or the best hitter on the Angels for today. So I'm going to be loading up on the Marlins. Is that something you think that you'll be doing as well if this ownership stays the same?
T. McBee coming in with the stats. Career home run rate, 4.76% for Michael Lorenzen. Shohei Ohtani, just 5.7%. How you like them apples?
All right. Eric's making his case. Eric is digging.
I'm not making my case. Last year, I was the guy that I was obsessed with Shohei Ohtani. You're like, I don't know, as far as a pitching prospect. And I'm like, he's going to strike out dudes at a ridiculous rate. It was one of those things early on that worked out well. And then we ran into some walk problems here and there. And we ran into some buzzsaws, specifically that Yankees game last year that cost me so much money. But we are back. I'm not going to roster as many Marlins as what you're saying you're going to. I will say the Marlins lineup, this is obviously my first full day of baseball back. Yesterday, I covered baseball and NBA, but I will say it surprised me just in terms of Jorge Soler. That's a bat you have to have interest in. Brian Anderson, I don't think he'll be in this lineup here today, but we've got a number of guys that I think have above average power. Avisai Garcia is a guy that I was overweight to constantly last year, constantly. One of the more underrated hitters in all of baseball. So I think we have more power, more to extract out of this lineup than we've had in many, many years, at least since Starling Marte when he was the one-off du jour last year. It's nice to see them get some bats back into the mix, trying to be competitive. So yay, props to Miami for making moves, getting rid of Jeter and doing those things. But Soler, definitely my favorite bat from this lineup. Garcia second, maybe kind of just 1A and 1B. I'll get to lots of those two specifically.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just look at the Marlins and individually, is there any hitter where I'm like, oh, I'd love rostering this guy? No, but all of them are projected for 1% ownership and they're going up against, the best hitting pitcher in the history of the sport. And he's projected for 36% ownership when he isn't really a good pitcher. So that's really what's going to drive a lot of my baseball decisions. Just going to be ownership and not always necessarily based on talent. But let's talk about the Angels offense now going up against Eliezer Hernandez. Hernandez pulling up his stats for, should I look at his hitting stats too? What do you think of Eliezer Hernandez as a hitter? Is he like third best all time? Fourth best? Him or Babe Ruth? Eric, you got to give me something here. I want to know where you rank Eliezer Hernandez amongst, what's also funny about this? We don't even have to worry about it because pitchers don't hit at all anymore. So we could look at Eliezer Hernandez.
Ohtani still hits.
Yeah.
I bet you Michael Lorenzen pinch hits this season. Just saying.
For Ohtani?
He might actually play some outfield this season. I wouldn't be completely shocked.
He does have a good arm. So
he has outfield eligibility in our league. So that's the only reason.
Ooh. Well, Eliezer Hernandez stats last year, not terrific, but he did show some strikeout stuff. 4.18 ERA, 4.6 expected ERA, strikeout rate 23.6%. The year before, 32.1%. The matchup against the Angels, as long as they are healthy, is never going to be quite ideal. But Hernandez is a pitcher with some strikeout upside. He's cheap, and people aren't really rostering him. So for me personally, I'd rather roster Eliezer Hernandez than Dylan Bundy. I'd rather roster him than Michael Lorenzen. Not because I think of him as a considerably better pitcher than those guys. So he might be a little bit better, but mostly because he only has a third or a fourth of the ownership of them. I think that's a good pivot play to make. Does that make sense to you?
It does, but Ohtani, Trout, Walsh, if we can get any kind of a pulse for Anthony Rendon this season, Joe Adell has massive power. I don't really find myself wanting to try to extract a whole heck of a lot from it. I get the case, and you just made a great case for it. 23.2% K percentage is all right from last, or 23.6% from last year is all right, but he gives up some pretty hard contact, launch angles up. Once again, you can roster a lot of pitchers. He has to be in consideration. He's getting more attention. I think just because Chris Flexen's 9,600 and Eliezer Hernandez is 7,500, you're seeing drastic difference. I think I'm with you where I would prefer getting to more Flexen against the Twins. If I had to pick one of the two, if I'm going to try to make him and Manoah lineups work, I think I'm going to be shying away from some of the best offenses. That doesn't sound fun, but I could definitely see myself rostering some Hernandez and Flexen together and kind of just finding the very low bottom end options and just hope we get some blow up potential from the likes of Inoa going up against Washington, or Alex Wood we'll talk about here in this last game. There's some ways to get different, I think, at pitcher. He's just another one of those dudes to do it with.
Yeah, and then as for the Angels offense, it does look like they're going to be pretty popular. They're projected to be the second most owned offense on the slate behind the Atlanta Braves. I think as a team for stacks, I'm going to want to be underweight to. But for one-off, Shohei Ohtani, always a good one-off. Mike Trout, always a good one-off. But the lineup just gets so thin behind some of those guys. Rendon's a really good hitter. The back end of the lineup just sucks. They have a lot of high-end prospects, but none of them have panned out to this point. When you start to look at guys like Joe Adell, or somebody like, let me think, who else is? Joe Adell is the big one. He was one of the best. Brandon Marsh being the other one. Two guys that were really well-regarded prospects that have just struck out a lot and not really quite put it together. So Rendon, Walsh, Ohtani, Trout, all fine one-offs. I don't think I'm going to be making too many full stacks of this team, especially when you consider how popular they are. What are you going to be doing with the Angels as a stack?
I'm going to stack them a lot, probably. I know that there's negative leverage to be had here. I think what happens is that if you can just extract, you always have to kind of make a stand, because it's going to be hard to build a lot of lineups if I'm going to be higher on Manoah that are going to have Ohtani, Trout in the stack and kind of working from there. I think I'm just going to be prioritizing Mike Trout going forward. It just kind of has to be done. Shohei Ohtani, the best hitting pitcher in baseball. Yes, there you go. But he's garnering 28.9%. Give me a lower owned Mike Trout where we have a 10-year sample size of him being pretty much the best hitter on planet Earth that's ever existed, so long as he stays healthy. So I think I'll just be starting with Trout, working down and avoiding the Ohtani one. If he hits a 30% bomb, so be it. There's still ways that you can navigate it at 6K and kind of find some different ways to still survive. But Mike Trout, Joe Adell is a guy that I'm just going to be higher on than the field pretty much every single slate. He's got a lot of power. He had a terrible last season, but I see some positive regression in store for him based on his minor league numbers. So I'm really going to be overinvested in him. Brandon Marsh, he's in the projected lineup, and I think that he was a guy that we saw some massive upside towards at the end of last season as well. Kind of a big league hitter coming into his own. So I'm probably going to be higher on some of the back end guys, along with Walsh and Trout, and hoping that Ohtani doesn't burn me in those stacks.
We have a super chat here from my Phil Arc. First, welcome back, Eric. So he's welcoming back. Good guys, I know nothing about baseball. Is it worth drafting one or two teams or just skip a sport you are not comfortable with? Is baseball even a sport? They barely move for hours. So Eric missed the big running bit of last week, which was me making my own definition for a sport and determining what was and wasn't a sport. Baseball is a sport because you do have a team, per my definition, that are physically trying to prevent you from putting points up on the board. So baseball, to me, fits the qualification. Baseball is a sport. As for the other part of your question, my fellow Arc, it depends when you say nothing, what you're like. If you're just making your lineups based on absolutely nothing, I probably wouldn't recommend that. And it's fine. You don't have to be EMAC and play every single DFS sport that's in the lobby of every single site.
Express Slate, Showdown, Tiers.
But with that said, this is such a data-driven sport that I don't necessarily think you have to know a ton about it. And I do think our tools are really useful to use. And if you want to try them out, we are right now using a promo code FASTBALL. It expires today. It's only $1 for a weekly pass. So if you do want to just kind of get your foot in the door and see if it's something you might be interested in, I would recommend that. It's only $1 using that promo code FASTBALL. I think that's a good way to dip your toes into it. But in general, no, I wouldn't recommend just putting your money on something with zero information whatsoever. I know Joey Corman does that from time to time with some success, but not something I generally recommend people to do. Do you have anything to add to that, Eric?
No, I don't know this bit at all, but $1, I think we can find a way to scrounge up $1 and check it out, see everything that we have behind here. Somebody named a Westport Ephemera says, I don't know anything about baseball, but I know how about baseball a little bit, enough to know that the tools here at Awesemo are going to be able to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you regardless. I hadn't looked at baseball for 3 days. I'd put a sheet together before I left for my trip and then just kind of revisited stuff that had happened over the weekend. Came in completely blind yesterday. Did an hour, 2 hours of research and did a show, and all of a sudden I'm building lineups on a show that got third in the mini max. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff that can happen just by using the tools and knowing what you're looking for. So the experience of learning how to play MLB DFS can be so profitable. And I think it's probably the softest sport out of everything remaining, purely because of the tools here at Awesemo. I think it's the most beatable DFS sport that exists, purely because enough people don't use the idea that like, oh, I'm lost 3 days. Oh, obviously I have a bad process. No, your process might be perfect. And that fourth, fifth, sixth day, whatever it is, you end up winning all the money. So welcome to MLB DFS. I find it to be the sport that, it's the only sport I didn't really play growing up, but it's the sport that I fell in love with living out here in LA. And I'm telling you, there is a lot of money to be made in the MLB DFS streets if you know what you're looking for.
Yeah. And it's something that, once again, if you're just building lineups based on like, hey, I'm just going to throw a couple names, it's probably not going to go well. You want to be making stacks. You want to be looking for leverage. And baseball is also a sport where you could legitimately only have 2 or 3 winning slates in an individual month, and it still be a profitable month, because if you're playing baseball DFS properly, the big days should be significant winning days, because if you're playing lineups that are leveraged and are way different in the field, then your good days are probably going to be very profitable. One game left to talk about on the main slate. That is the San Francisco Giants at home against the San Diego Padres. After this, we'll be doing a little rundown of the early slate. It looks like we've started to get some lineups in for that. San Francisco Giants at home, Alex Wood on the mound for them, Nick Martinez for the San Diego Padres. So Alex Wood is one of the only pitchers who I assume that most people came in and really know the name of that's pitching on today's main slate. He's somebody who's had a good amount of success in the past. And something that's interesting, if you look at his splits for his career, he's always been a guy who's much better in the first half of the season than the second half. Later on in the year, he tends to get fatigued. His velocity starts to dip. But once you get him at the start of the year, top end pitcher. So last year, 3.83 ERA, 3.87 expected ERA, really solid strikeout stuff as well, 26%, highest of his career and the largest in quite some years because the year before 23.1, 19.6, 21.2. So the 26% pretty promising with him pitching in San Francisco. How do you like Alex Wood today? He does appear to be one of the safer options, even though it's a difficult matchup.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that I would expect to have more attention. I mean, this Michael Lorenzen thing just throws me way off because I have no idea why he's as popular as he is. At least Dylan Bundy for 1,100 less gives me the ability to go roster some of these top tier offenses. Alex Baker says this all the time, but you win tournaments with your stacks and you want to be able to get stacks. Finding these super cheap stacks that are combined with expensive pitchers generally is going to be a very popular way to go because of, you know, how slates kind of play out and knowing that you're pretty much getting security there in the top end. And then the value stack, they're either in a great game environment like Coors Field or something else of that nature. This slate is so wide open for a 7-gamer because the top tier, Alek Manoah just has a tough matchup. We've got the guys that we've talked about, Ranger Suarez. Can he keep it going? Mets are a much more difficult matchup than before. And Noah against Washington, we've seen some really bright spots out of him as well, but there's question marks for everybody. Alex Wood, I think, is the safest pitcher on this slate going up against San Diego. I do not believe in the San Diego offense without Tatis. I think they're going to have some massive problems. They're not Oakland problems, but they are definitely a team that I'm going to be targeting when you have guys like Nola batting second. Manny Machado is a great hitter, obviously, but it saw a little bit of regression. Hosmer's been garbage. Cronenworth from the left side against Wood, definitely really like going up against that. It's the likes of Voit. It's the likes of Will Myers. You know, they can run into some problems there, but for the most part, I think it's a pretty average lineup, if that. So Alex Wood has the most talent historically out of any pitcher on this slate. I mean, we saw some flashes from Manoah last year that could, you know, transcend that. But just over the course of his entire career from 2015 to now, we've seen a very consistent K rate. You alluded to the 26% K percentage this season. That matches his 2016 marks, but also expected ERA under 4. I just don't find this to be a problem to roster as much of him as you want. He's definitely, I think, the most secure guy by far.
3 2/3 innings in his final spring training start,
Great.
Which to me makes me think that we're probably looking at somewhere around 5 innings for today. So that's promising when you look at Alex Wood compared to some of the other pitchers we've seen who, you know, will be stars that go like 4 innings in their first start. I feel pretty good that we could get 5+ from Alex Wood. Probably not going to get 7, but we can't really expect that from many pitchers today. On the other side, we've got Nick Martinez starting for the San Diego Padres. Now, Nick Martinez on the road against the San Francisco Giants. One other thing I want to point out about this game is if you just look at the weather, it is going to show that there's winds blowing out in San Francisco. But the way that stadium is structured next to the water, the wind is always blowing out, and it's just built in a way where the architecture, not that I know all that much about architecture, because, you know, what am I? But I know that it's built in a way to limit the wind effect. So every day, if you look at the weather, you're going to see wind blowing out in San Francisco, and it's not something that's actually significant. So Nick Martinez going up against a Giants team that surprised a lot of people last year. I don't think anybody expected that we would see the San Francisco Giants actually end up winning this division. But if you look at Martinez, he's not been in the big leagues for a few years, and now all of a sudden he reemerges with the Padres. His last time pitching in the MLB, 2017. That makes it hard for me to expect much from him.
Yeah, I don't expect anything from him. There's that. So Nick Martinez, looking at our top pitchers tool, I mean, he's down there 17.4%. I mean, that is pretty crazy to see. 10% ownership here, 5,900. You could talk about him as a Bundy pivot, but I don't know really what there is to extract here. I don't know. Obviously, we have the best data team. I'm going to have to look more at him than what I have already this morning, but I was pretty interested in the San Francisco side of this one.
Yeah, and why Let me see if I could find more information. Why? What has Nick Martinez been up to?
He pitched 4 innings last outing. That was on March 30th. So he pitched. He's basically going to be the Paddock fill-in with Paddock shipped off. So Nick Martinez is going to be the back end of the rotation guy here. I don't really find there to be a ton of optimism, but 4 innings is one of the larger allotments you're going to see for some of these starters coming out of spring training. So that was his last start. It's 11 days ago. I don't really know what to expect. The K rate is 14% in a pretty limited sample size from however long ago, 30.4% hard hit percentage. So we can limit some damage in that regard, but X slugging 493 over 381 batted ball events here that I'm looking at from 2015 to 2017. I have no idea why he's gaining as much traction as what he is in our tools.
All right. So Nick Martinez, after he had no interest from a major league team when he was a free agent in 2018, he signed with the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters of the NPB. So
let's go.
So
read that again. The what?
The what?
The Ham Fighters?
Yeah, HAM Fighters. The Nippon Ham Fighters.
What do you need to fight against ham for? It's delicious.
Some people keep kosher. I don't know. There's lots of reasons to.
The vegan strike. It's just like a celery stick uniform.
So he went from the Nippon Ham Fighters from 2018 to 2020, and then last year he played with the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks. So that's where he's been. And it looks like
You're trolling me.
I am 100% serious. While he pitched over in Japan, he had pretty good numbers. He had a 3.02 ERA, struck out, it looks like about a hitter per inning. So we had good numbers overseas. I think I could actually, all the jokes we just made about Nick Martinez, now that I've looked in and see all that he had some success overseas, he's cheap. I think that just the fact that he's an unknown kind of makes him more appealing to me, at least than guys like Michael Lorenzen and Dylan Bundy.
Okay. Again, 2017 was a long time ago. If we've seen some sort of optimism here, obviously there are some studs coming out of Korea, out of Japan. There's definitely some opportunity, but it's pretty few and far between. Those guys, the elite guys come over, and most of them are back half of the lineup utility type players, with the exception of some very drastic exceptions. But I don't really feel that comfortable about it. I mean, this San Francisco team, it's just become more dangerous over time. I think just 4 innings, sure, he stretched out. Why not take some shots? But there's already around 10% ownership on him here. So maybe just because the top 2 pitchers tool is on him, I'll take more of a look at him. But from what I saw this morning, I really had no interest.
So at first glance, I agree. I don't have interest. But then when I started to consider, he's been away for a few years. He's pitched well overseas. And then you also consider, like, what's the difference between Nick Martinez, Michael Lorenzen, and Dylan Bundy? Nick Martinez probably sucks. I know for a fact that Michael Lorenzen and Dylan Bundy suck, and they're far more popular than him. So we've got Dylan Bundy's projected for 30% ownership. Lorenzen projected for 36. Martinez is projected for 10. They're all in the same price range. I'll take a chance on the guy who I'm like 99% sure sucks, as opposed to the guys that I'm 100% sure suck. That's the only way I'm looking at it. He's a lot lower owned than guys in the same price range as him, and chances are they're probably pretty similar.
My God. Okay. Well, here we go. Again, our tools when it comes to baseball are elite beyond elite. And I'm just trusting that this is the 17.4%. Now, anybody could get blown up, and San Francisco has proven to be an offense that can do some major damage, especially at the top end of this lineup. So I find it to be uncomfortable to roster and click that name, but I guess got to consider it with 17.4% top 2 pitcher percentage. But I did not see that whatsoever.
By the way, we do have a message here from Kyle Stoppa DFS, who says on FanGraphs, they have Nick Martinez projected for a 24% K rate this year.
Yeah, FanGraphs is high if that's the case. I mean, 24% historically around 16%. That is, I mean, did his velocity his career K percentage is 13.2% in, that's a pretty large sample size, over 4,500 pitches at the big league level. I don't know if you can improve that much coming overseas and coming back. 24% feels broken. Like maybe somebody put an input in wrong.
And by the way, now I'm just looking for reasons to like him too, because
I know you are. And everything I look at makes me hate him.
Yeah, this is going to make me, because this is where I've decided I'm going to lose my money on tonight. But Nick Martinez, here's one other thing. And this is another good point being brought up in the YouTube chat. And I looked it up. It's true. Tamakas in YouTube chat is saying, clearly believes in Nick Martinez, the San Diego Padres.
Yeah.
Because the contract they gave him in the offseason, it is a 4-year, $25.5 million contract. And it is player options on the deal beyond this year, not team options, player options. The Padres clearly like what they're seeing. They made a fairly significant financial investment in him based on what they saw overseas.
This is outrageous. This is just outrageous. I don't really know what to say. Outrageous. Now my mic, there we go.
The only point of this that I'm saying is this. If he is actually going to be a third or fourth of the ownership of Jared Lorenzen, I was thinking the former fat quarterback for the Giants.
I was just thinking of it too. Kentucky, great, if you will.
Yeah.
He played at Kentucky. It was great.
The Pillsbury throw boy. And Josh Gilman saying 4 for $25 million is not a lot of money. It's not an insignificant amount of money.
It's more than the average bear. I mean, think about it this way. 1 year, $17 million went to Cody Bellinger. It was 1 year, $1 million. Who was it on yesterday's slate that I was like, oh my God, that contract is absurd. I can't remember. I will figure it out. I will figure it out before the end of this show.
Yeah, I'm trying to, what is Bundy's?
Nick Martinez. I'm literally reading his amateur. Like I'm reading his amateur stuff. And then, I just need more fan graphs. What is this? He's 31 years old. This is next level, right? This is next level. Steamer literally has him projected for a 1.4 home run per 9, 8.43 K per 9. Where is this number coming from? Where does 8.43 come for Steamer in terms of their projection for him? 4.53 whip is what they're projecting him for. That would be lowest on his career by a mile.
It's going to be translated numbers from his overseas stats.
Got it. Okay. It's just okay.
For what's worth, Michael Lorenzen 1-year contract for $6.75 million. So the Padres made a bigger commitment to him than the Angels have made Michael Lorenzen. But hey, that is going to do it for the main slate. We're going to talk about the early slate. Guys, if you want to go watch that back or, for timestamp purposes, just to make it clear here.
Do we even talk about the offenses?
Oh, yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add about the Giants or Padres offenses?
Yeah, Trent Grisham against a lefty. He's still probably going to be leading off. He's 1%. If that's going to be the case, sweet. But with Jock Peterson added to the San Francisco lineup going up against Martinez, it's just a power bat that, in the same way that I'm overweight to Joe Adell. Jock Peterson has proven to be way, way better than Joe Adell over a sample size. It was unbelievable for the Braves last season, was unbelievable for a large sample size for the Dodgers, just in pure power numbers. So Jock Peterson batting fourth here, expected against a righty. I'll be overweight there. Darren Ruff, I think is just another guy to be getting to. Mike Yastrzemski, this entire San Francisco side, I was planning on talking about them as a team that I really wanted to get to based on the top stacks tool. We're looking at San Francisco, 5% top stack percentage. Ownership share is a little bit higher, but if you can isolate a way to make that stack pretty unowned, it's not too hard to do. I think you can get to the likes of a Jorge Alfaro from San Diego as well, where he's catcher. Don't play him in outfield. I'm going to make sure I don't. But there's enough that I can get to a little bit on both sides of it. But Alex Wood, definitely the priority from the entire game.
All right. So let's hit on the early slate now. And if you guys have any questions at all, you could throw them in as we're talking about. We're not going to go entirely game by game because we do have an out time here because we have other stuff that we have to record today. But I want to do just kind of a roundup of the top teams to target in terms of stacking on the early slate, and then also the top pitchers that we want to be targeting. And just to go over all the games we have for the morning slate, it is the Cleveland Guardians against the Kansas City Royals. That's going to be a difficult one to remember. Cleveland Guardians. We've thrown a new name into the lexicon there. Aaron Savali on the mound for Cleveland. For the Kansas City Royals, Carlos Hernandez. Pittsburgh, Zach Thompson on the mound against Dakota Hudson for the St. Louis Cardinals. Milwaukee, Adrian Hauser on the mound against the Baltimore Orioles, who are pitching Bruce Zimmerman. Then the Colorado Rockies, Austin Gomber against Taylor Hearn for the Texas Rangers. We're on the final, rotation of pitchers here. So we are not yet seeing guys making the second starts of the year. As a result, a lot of really shitty pitchers across today's slate versus the early and the late one. But talking about this early slate, who are the pitchers that you want to get the most exposure to?
Austin Gomber sticks out to me gigantically. 33.8% hard hit percentage last season. That's the kind of stuff that's going to make you a successful real life pitcher at a spot like Coors Field. But the K rate has actually been up for him, 23.2% K percentage. He's by far the cheapie that you're getting to on this slate that opens up the entire board, 5,700. So if we're looking at the top two pitchers tool, you've got Dakota Hudson. We'll make sure St. Louis gets in a late start. There's some major weather concerns that exist in that game. So Dakota Hudson, 33.4% top two pitchers percentage, but nearly 50% ownership. Give me Austin Gomber at 5,700 in Texas. Very difficult matchup, revamped Texas lineup. But, guys like Seager from the left side, a little bit more neutralized. I mean, he's a phenomenal hitter against both sides, but ownership right now at 19.7% relative to ownership. Give me all the Austin Gomber and all the land. And I did not expect to say that this morning.
Yeah. And then one other thing to point out also, because we had Larry C in the chat asked if we're worried about the Cardinals game. I saw a couple other people bring it up earlier. Yes, as of right now, it looks like it's a game that has some weather concerns, but it also doesn't start for a few hours. So we're going to need some kind of weather updates now, but at least it is something to keep an eye on because it does seem a game that has some risk of being postponed. For now, I think we should just talk about all the games as is. I totally agree with you on Austin Gomber. He's not all that popular and he's pretty solid. And something else to consider when you look at his numbers, he makes half his starts at Coors Field, which really inflates some of his earned runs or some of his earned runs allowed. And he still has had some amount of success. You look at last year, 4.53 ERA, 4.06 expected ERA, strikeout rate of 23.2%. Not bad for somebody who's considered a ground ball pitcher. The matchup against the Texas Rangers, the Rangers do have a better offense this year than they've had in some previous years. That aside, though, it's not like we're looking at what I would consider to be an incredibly difficult matchup for Austin Gomber. And as is, he faces teams like the Dodgers at Coors Field. So it's not like he's been, not familiar with tough matchups. So I think Gomber, particularly for the outlook of this slate and his price point, he is somebody I like getting to because the rest of the pitching options, like Adrian Hauser's 8,900. He's the most secure pitcher on the slate, I think, going up against the Baltimore Orioles, but he's also already projected for 41% ownership. Gomber at 20%, I think, is pretty reasonable. Any other pitcher takes for this slate, it's tough to really get behind, a lot of like Aaron Savali at 9,500. He's projected for 32% ownership, but those are kind of decisions we have to make today.
Yeah, I think even on FanDuel, Austin Gomber, 7,500 relative to Hauser and Hudson. I just like getting to him here in this spot. It's a guy that I don't think there's any pitch concerns. For me too, it's just his stuff isn't going to overwhelm you, but he's got that curveball once again that he can just kind of keep down. And that's why he can be successful at a spot like Coors Field. He has a ton of vertical movement that turns on it. 4.1 inches of vertical movement on that curveball, 64.7 inches of drop over the course of 2021. That kind of stuff really is going to play well in the big leagues, even though he is not a hard thrower whatsoever. So hard hit percentage, he is just elite at keeping that down. I think that that's good enough on a site like FanDuel where you get those bonuses. It's hard to reach those bonuses this time of year, to be able to get to 6 innings. But if I think one guy has a chance of doing it, as weird as it is to say, I'm just very high on Austin Gomber today.
Yeah, I think relative to the other cheap pitching options today, here, because we've got like Josh Gillum in the chat is saying, don't play Gomber. The Rangers smacked Ryu and Berrios. I don't put all
Ryu
that much
is
weight.
Terrible now. Can we just revamp that? Do not look at a guy and a name recognition and think that Hyunjin Ryu is regressed so prominently with Toronto.
And the other thing too is here are the cheap pitchers we have today: Gomber, Taylor Hearn, Zach Thompson. All right, I agree. I don't think Gomber's the best pitcher in the world, but I think he's better than Taylor Hearn and Zach Thompson, who are both comparably owned and more expensive. Exactly. So I think, relative to that, it's all the pitcher. I've read off the names of the pitchers on this slate. It sucks. Aaron Savali is expensive. Adrian Hauser's expensive. Then you look over on, I know FanDuel is a little bit different based on some of the pricing. Like Adrian Hauser to me is the best play on FanDuel. He's 7,800 and also weirdly way less popular than he is on DK. So you can roster Adrian Hauser at 7,800 against the Orioles for 22% ownership compared to like Savali, who's 8,900 and project for 29% ownership. So I do think that Adrian Hauser is the safest pitcher on the slate, but relative to ownership, at least on DraftKings, it's already there. Is there anything else you look at here that really stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, that it's the nice thing about rostering a guy like Gomber is that it's 89 degrees there in Texas. And if he is off, there's an opportunity to roster on the other side of him, and I'll just kind of make my stands on both sides of it and move on with my day. Every other game is 60 degrees or cooler. There's some opportunities to be stacking up elsewhere here. I mean, Kansas City against Cleveland yesterday was the best in game environment with that 20-mile-an-hour wind blowing out. Very, very different on this kind of a slate. I think on a two-pitcher site, I think I'm with you where I probably want to get to some more Hauser. I mean, you had talked about FanDuel 7,800 there for him, but even on DK, I really like getting to him as the secondary pitcher that I want to be rostering, but they all look so similar to me that when I see a glaring mistake like Austin Gomber in terms of ownership, that's the guy I really want to go overweight to. And whoever falls into my lineup will kind of be, a hodgepodge based on whoever I stack.
All right, so let's talk about some of the offenses here, and then we'll wrap up this slate. Do us a favor, guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the MLB Live Before Lock later in the day. Also, if you want to get some exclusive Awesemo deals, you could sign up to our MVP program by texting MVP to 1-660-656-4417. That information is below in the description box of the YouTube channel. If you sign up for MVP program, we do currently have a 50% off Awesemo Plus weekly pass discount. So that's something to check out. Once again, that number is texting MVP to 1-660-656-4417. If you didn't remember that number, check it out below in the description box. All right.
Work on your memory.
Yeah. The joke I've been making is that nobody in this day and age remembers any kind of phone numbers except for Jordan Klein and his ex-girlfriend's number. Other than that, nobody else can remember a cell phone number. Sorry, Jordan, I had to do it again because Eric's back. So if you are not somebody who just remembers phone numbers, check it out in the description box of the YouTube video below. In terms of stacks here for the early slate, there's nothing that looks egregiously popular relative to a small slate. We have 21% ownership going to the Brewers, but they do have a 19.4% chance of being a top stack. So that looks about reasonable over on DraftKings. Teams that do look a little bit under-owned, Pittsburgh Pirates, they are really cheap, but I don't think it's a necessary source of salary savings for today because what are we spending up for at pitcher? So I don't see any, crazy good leverage stacks. Maybe the St. Louis Cardinals if that game plays out because they're projected for single-digit ownership. That's probably the team I would be prioritizing if the rain does pass. But how about you? If you're picking one team to stack for the early slates, first on DraftKings, and we'll do it for FanDuel, who would be your DK stack of choice?
So yesterday, Cleveland was my favorite stack, and today they're probably my least favorite stack. I'm going to just start with the stack I don't like. Cleveland has Stephen Kwan, Ahmed Rosario, Miles Straw, Franmil Reyes, all in the outfield, all four the most popular plays at the position. That is problematic. Of course, Jose Ramirez coming off of another game. He's just electric. He's by far the best bat in this lineup, but nearly 40% rostership now for him. I will take my chances on hoping that this is not the team that burns me. And I just think that just based on their individual ownership of those hitters specifically, I think they're just a team that you stay away from stacking and live with the result of it. We only have them as a top stack 12.4% of the time. Ownership share is 11.9, but I'm looking at the individual ownership of all these batters that I would want to get to most. And I find them to be a pretty clear stay away for me on this slate. I'll take my chances going elsewhere. I like Austin Gomber and I like the Colorado bats for sure on the other side of this game, or on the same side of this game, if you will. I just think that it really sticks out. This game environment, 89 degrees, that is drastically different than everything else we're looking at here on this slate. Austin Gomber, it's a price play, as well as a guy that I think is just not that different relative to the other talent that exists at the pitcher position, which is why I'm making the case for him. But Taylor Hearn is not good. Under a 21% K percentage last year, 257 expected batting average, 434 expected slugging. Problematic there. Now, the hard hit percentage is down. This Colorado lineup is not super potent up and down the entire spot, but specific bats like Chris Bryant, Charlie Blackmon, if he can just get back to doing anything remotely close to what he's done in years past and towards the end of last season. Brendan Rodgers, is a guy that I want to get to. Connor Joe, is a guy that you can be rostering up. I think he's leading off today. I just saw that lineup come through. I like this team to really stack up. Probably my favorite offense just because 90 degrees, 4.6 implied runs. I think that that's good enough to be a priority.
Yeah, and then just the Brewers also, and I'll pull in FanDuel from this, is we've got three really popular projected offenses on FanDuel. It is the Milwaukee Brewers, the Texas Rangers, and the Colorado Rockies, all of them projected around 20% ownership. But We have about a neutral leverage score on the Milwaukee Brewers, whereas the Texas Rangers, 22% ownership share, only projected to be optimal 17% of the time. Colorado Rockies, 19% ownership share, projected to be optimal 15% of the time. So we've got similar ownership on all these three chalky offenses, but the Brewers have by far the best top stack odds. I mean, by far is relative. It's, 20% as opposed to, 15%. But still, I think the Brewers are the team to prioritize amongst those chalky stacks. So Brewers for me, Cardinals, I'm looking to be a little bit contrarian. How about you if you're looking at one of the more popular stacks?
Yeah, I think the Cardinals, I'll be playing a lot on FanDuel, looking at some of the prices, looking at the top stack odds here. Obviously Goldschmidt, Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, you can never really go wrong in that regard. I think I saw Lars Nootbaar is in the lineup today as well. That's somebody that I'll probably get to a little bit more of. Paul DeJong just kind of writing off. I think he's broken. Andrew, is it Knizer? I mean, he's the 8-hole guy, 2,400 there for him on DraftKings at catcher. I think that's all right, but I'm not really looking for any salary savings. I think I can get to some of the best bats on the slate without really asking for much, just because of how much Gomber I'm expecting to have.
All right. Any other thoughts you have for today's baseball, Eric? It's good to do a show with you. I know we stretched it a little bit, but just because I had so much fun hanging out with you that I felt like let's go 90 minutes.
Oh, that's what it was. You missed me.
Yeah, then it's two slates. There's not that much other content on the YouTube channel. I figured why not give the people some extra content that they could give them reason to like and subscribe. Any other further baseball thoughts for you?
No, it's great to be back talking baseball. I'm just getting my sea legs under me. Yesterday, got right out of the gate. It's nice. I'll be on MLB Live Before Lock today, which will be a lot of fun to be able to do. Who am I doing that with? I can't even remember who I was doing with. I'm doing it with Neil. That's fantastic. I'm pretty excited for that. So you're going to want to check that out. We'll be recapping the 7-gamer here. Best of luck on this 4-gamer. It's great to have baseball year round throughout the day. That's what really gets us through.
All right, that is going to do it for us. Guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out Live Before Lock later on the day with Eric and Neil. Other than that, good luck. Enjoy the two slate baseball.